I would highly recommend anyone that's thinking of starting out have some sort of nest egg to kind of rely on, even if you don't use it. I've never used it, but it's for peace of mind.
This is the voice of Stevie Dillon, who runs Stevie Says Social. And in this episode, Stevie shares her terrific story about getting started in her own business. That nest egg, or pillow as she refers to it, is only part of her planning. There is a whole lot more. Welcome to So You Want to Start a Business, the podcast where we interview business owners, entrepreneurs, and other smart guests so we can learn what it takes to create, start, and grow a business. As always, this show is brought to you by my book, So You Want to Start a Business, and you can grab an excerpt over at www.thestartupsteps.com. I'm your host, Ingrid Thompson, and it is my absolute pleasure to bring you these interviews, and I thank you for taking time in your day to spend time with us. Each and every guest has their unique perspective on business, and today is no exception. Listen in and learn from Stevie's wisdom. Are you ready? Let's go. Here we are today with Stevie Dillon. Good morning, Stevie.
Hi, how you going?
Great, thank you. Thanks so much for joining us. And I know you've got a pretty fantastic story for our listeners today. So, Stevie, let's just start. What business are you in? What is your business?
So I have a business called Stevie Says Social, and it is a social media strategy, training and consultancy business specialising in service-based businesses.
In service, but it's just such a terrific title, isn't it? Stevie Says Social. It just all works, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So when did you start this business?
So I officially started in November last year as a fully fledged business, but had been running a blog called Stevie Says Social since the beginning of last year, and never actually ever intended for it to be a business as quickly as it was. But it kind of went from being a blog to having clients asking me about my services and not actually knowing what my services were. And then going from that into sort of putting services together, taking on clients and launching in November last year.
Oh, that's fantastic. So you've kind of answered the next question about sort of how it happened, but why? I mean, people asked you, but why did you start your business?
So I actually used to be a solicitor back in the day, a lawyer, and went from that into digital marketing, and honestly just found my calling. Like, I love it so much. And worked for about 10 years in different digital marketing roles. So I worked for the Queensland Reds and worked at a real estate agency in Brisbane, which I loved. And so was there for sort of the last 4 years, and just got to the point with that role that I wanted to do something more, and kind of had in the back of my mind that I wanted to start a business, but sort of thought that it would be something that would be 5 years down the track. And it kind of got fast tracked, which is so amazing, when I started the blog at the beginning of last year. So it was kind of a really natural progression, I guess, from transitioning out of my full-time job while I had the blog, and then kind of into the business. So yeah, that's kind of briefly how it happened.
And then what did you actually want? What did you want from the business from day one? Like, what was it going to give you that was different to what you were doing previously?
Yeah. So the biggest thing for me is that I've always wanted to do something for myself. And I don't think I ever really kind of knew what that looked like, whether it was going to be a business or whether it was going to be something that was a hobby that would occupy my time. But I've always been super passionate about work, and even when I was working in a corporate job, it wasn't a matter of, I'm just going to work and it's kind of, it is what it is. So I think, I don't know, like, I just think it's quite funny that, it's happened the way that it has. And in terms of what I get out of it now, it's doing everything that I was doing in my corporate job, but doing it for myself rather than doing it for someone else, which is so cool.
It is so cool indeed. So has there been a moment where you actually realised you were in business, that it was a real thing?
Yes. So I was in Europe in August last year for about a month. And prior to that, I had gotten a couple of different inquiries from people saying, what sort of services do you have in terms of social media? And then just when I was overseas, really randomly, for some reason, inquiries really snowballed. So I went from getting a couple of inquiries to 4 or 5 inquiries a week with people saying, what are your services? How can, you help me with my social media? And it was only then that it kind of clicked for me that, oh my gosh, this is something that I really need to start taking more seriously than I was. And it's when I got back from Europe. So I spent a month kind of traveling around and sitting on beaches trying to work out whether I wanted to take it full time, that I came back and kind of went, you know what, let's take this seriously. Let's put it all together, and started taking on clients. So I guess it became really real when I first took on my, very first client, and worked with them from start to finish. And it kind of went from there.
Oh, that's so lovely. It's one of my favourite questions in the interview series because everybody has a different point. Like for different people, it just is such a different, that realness comes from different things. So that's so for you, those inquiries made it feel real. So given that you do what you do and you help people with social media, and I guess you kind of have answered this question, but just how do you know what customers want? How do you know that they want what you're offering? I mean, clearly they're making inquiries, so they are, but it's still more than that, isn't it? You still need to be able to provide what they're looking for. How do you 100%. Know what that is?
It's quite interesting, I think, with social media, and maybe it's every industry, but it's because I'm in social media, but it is such a saturated industry. So I just know from, looking in Facebook groups and things like that, every time somebody puts out, a request for, a recommendation for a social media manager or someone to help them with social media, there's like 100 people that come back and offer their services out. So I knew that there was a demand. Probably the different thing for me is that I needed to be really mindful of the fact that because there are so many people offering those services, I really needed to be able to differentiate myself in terms of my niche and what my offering was. So really kind of honing in on service-based businesses because I understand them really well. Just being able to, I guess, set myself apart. It was never really about demand because that was always there. It was about making sure that where I was positioned in that kind of big glut of social media people, it was right for me and it was right in terms of, my price point and what I had to offer. And
also your expertise.
Totally.
You've been a service provider, so as a lawyer, you know what the professions, and it's different to someone who's a plumber or someone who's every different industry has different needs.
Totally.
And so very smart to choose an industry that you like, that you know, and that you want to work with.
Yeah, and I think the difference as well is that there's not a lot of people that are really kind of going all in on service providers, and I think it's so different in terms of social media and content and digital. The way that you need to structure it for those sort of industries is worlds apart from something like e-commerce or a product-based business. And it's something that I really understood really well. Like I understood, the value of things like content marketing and doing things to, establish yourself as an expert and somebody that people can, get to know and like and trust. And I think that's a completely different skill set to other types of digital marketing. And
and yours built from your blog, which is about content marketing. I mean, it's about the content and opinion and people getting to know you.
Exactly the same thing. And honestly, that's what I say to clients these days is pretty much exactly what I've done with my own business in terms of really regularly producing high quality content that helps your audience. When it all comes down to it, that's literally what every other service-based business needs to do if they want to succeed. And it's kind of cool to have as a bit of a case study over the last year, kind of going, it's a longer term play, but, this is what I have achieved on, a smaller scale in the last year for myself. And that's a potential for you as well, if you really invest in it.
And it shows. It's having your own business as an example is terrific.
Yeah, totally.
So a funding question. So, as you said, you're not a product, but you are selling your service. You probably didn't need to establish much, but how do you fund a business in those early days? I mean, you had clients right from the very beginning, but was there, and then how do you fund expansion? Where does money come from?
So I make it sound like I kind of made the jump really quickly, but to be honest, I probably never would have done it without a bit of a safety net. So I think probably the biggest benefit of being a service provider is that you don't need a whole heap of stock and there's not a lot of kind of startup costs. And I was really, really mindful of the fact that I needed to replace my income with client work before I left, which, because I'd kind of been building up, I was able to do. But in the background, I mean, I've been saving consistently for a fairly long time and have enough of a, I guess, like a nest egg or like a pillow, I guess, to support myself over the first at least 6 to 12 months of business, which, to be honest, is so important in terms of peace of mind. It allows me to take on the clients that I want to take on, wait for the right clients. It allows me to, really price myself properly from the outset and not really have to be worried about, client work and a consistent stream of income. So I guess for me, I've kind of funded it through my own savings, but I would highly recommend anyone that's thinking of starting out have some sort of nest egg to kind of rely on, even if you don't use it. I've never used it, but it's for peace of mind. You know what I mean?
It is. I call mine a buffer balance. So, calculate like what you need for 6 months. I love your expression, the pillow that you can rest on, because, it's that idea of having, I say sort of 6 to 12 months, like you say, because it does give you that freedom. And I love your language there about it allows you to choose which clients you work with, because so often what can happen is people get desperate and they just grab, and then when you've got the wrong clients, now you're doing work that's not fulfilling. It's just such an awful cycle, isn't it?
And it would be hard to come back from as well. Like, I think having the luxury of being able to build up to where you want to be early saves you getting 6 months down the track and realizing you're not where you want to be and then having to go back and kind of start again. I think there's so much value in that.
So much value. So, and just as an aside, was it difficult to be rigorous about your personal savings? Was that?
Yes. 100%. So I have probably in the last, I was actually talking to a friend, Chelsea at Cash Full Stop, about this a little while ago, and talking about how it wasn't until about 2 or 3 years ago that I really started to take saving seriously. And honestly, I think it's just kind of growing up a little bit more, realizing that you've got priorities around, wanting to potentially do something for yourself or buy a house or that sort of thing. And I had to get really disciplined about making sure that I was always saving first. And it took me about probably a year to get into that consistent pattern of doing it. But honestly, it has paid off so much. And it's a lot easier to do when you've got a full-time salary as well. So I got into the habit of doing it. And now, it's not like I have a consistent salary every week, but I can still do the same thing in terms of every payment that I have come in, saving a percentage of that first, putting it into a bank account where I don't even touch it. I don't even have it attached to my normal bank account because otherwise I transfer the money, and just having it sitting there as a nest egg.
Yeah, and that's the gift, isn't it? That you have it over there in another bank account, in another bank even. Yeah. That it can't be accessed easily.
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks for being so honest and open with that. So finding new customers. So do you actively look for customers, Stevie, or are you getting a good flow of customers? How do they find you, or how do you find them?
Yeah. So I am really, I wouldn't even say lucky, because it's what I recommend to other service providers is establishing yourself as an attraction business. And what I mean by that is by producing really high quality content, giving your best advice away for free without fear that it's going to, not have people come to you, because it actually, for me, has had the opposite effect. So I consistently produce 3,000 word blog post every week. I've just started a podcast, and all of that stuff takes a lot of time. But what it's meant is that over time, I've literally had a pipeline of clients that are my people. So people that I really do want to work with come to me and say, you seem like you know what you're talking about because of X, Y, Z, or I relate to you because, I hear you on the podcast or whatever. And it's almost like I've had the interview for the work before they even pick up the phone to call me. so that's kind of how it's rolled out for me. And literally I've never done any what I would call traditional advertising. And it's all kind of been content marketing and social media, which probably makes sense because I work in social media.
Now, Stevie, let's have an unashamed, let's plug your podcast right now. So anyone listening is on a podcast. So they need to jump over to iTunes and find your podcast, which is called
The Stevie Says Social Podcast.
That Stevie Says Social Podcast.
Yes.
All right, groundbreaking. And I think you're up to about episode 5 or 6 already, aren't you, as we're recording
episode
this?
4, yes.
Up episode 4, yeah.
Yeah, it's a whole new world. It's really exciting.
Yeah.
I love it. And I love that I get to go out and interview different service providers and talk to them about social media. So, so far so good.
So far so good. Okay, so pricing. And you can either tell us what you charge or not. Like that's not really the point of this question.
Yeah.
This question is, how do you decide a pricing strategy? And for something like this, we know that social media could cost this much or this much. How did you decide your pricing strategy?
So honestly, to be completely frank, that has been the hardest thing for me as a business owner because it's not something that people talk about. It's generally not something that people will put on their website or, it's not readily available or out there. And one of the hardest things with something like social media is that there are so many people that are pricing themselves too low. And there's an expectation amongst, some small business owners that they can get a certain level of service for almost no money. So it's something that I've found really hard. And to be honest, it's kind of why originally, in terms of my service offering, I decided not to go down the track of social media management because it's so oversaturated and there are so many people doing it for, in my view, not enough in terms of, the amount of work that goes into it. So I kicked off with social media strategy and social media consulting. And I think the value in that is a lot more sort of clear and readily sort of evident. But it's something I've really struggled with. I kind of priced myself way too low for my first social media strategy. It was an amount that I thought was great, but it ended up taking me 2 weeks, and I'm such a perfectionist that it was 8 o'clock until 6 o'clock every single day, refining it and making sure it was perfect. And literally from there, my strategy has been shifting my price in line with the amount of hours that it's taking me and pitching it to clients. And honestly, having a client that says yes validates it, and then you kind of go on from there. And that's honestly been my trial and error strategy.
Yeah. And I've heard, I can't remember whose strategy it is. It might be Gary Vaynerchuk's or somebody's, where they said, get 3 no's before you stop putting your price up,
Yeah, right.
Until, it's somebody, I can't remember whose it is, but it's put a price, and if people start saying yes, then you're okay. So go up a bit, and then, until you get no's consistently, then you're in the right ballpark, particularly if you've got your absolute... Yeah, and particularly when you're actually talking to your absolutely ideal clients. I mean, to get a no from someone who's not really your ideal doesn't really count the same. So I think that yes is
such a good point.
It's the yes that's the validation, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing as well. You will have people say no to a certain... There's such a difference between... social media posting, for example, and a really comprehensive social media strategy. And if you get a no from a particular person, sometimes it doesn't mean that your pricing is off. It means that, they're not looking for that level of service, so they're not your people. So that's something that I learned as well.
And I also think, no, not now. For some people,
totally.
They can, particularly with what you're offering, they can do this much. And this is the same for lots of different other businesses as well, not just something like yours, whereas they might think, I can do this myself. And so people go off and try to do it themselves, and then they realize how much time and energy they're spending trying to do it themselves, when in fact, if they would get somebody in who knew what they were doing, it might physically cost more in dollar terms, but in effort, in agony, in time,
totally.
it's totally worth every penny and more, in fact.
Yeah, and that's so funny actually, because that often is the case. So I'll kind of, in terms of a strategy, I'll even do a strategy for a client with the option for management afterwards. And, you know, they'll want to do it themselves. And then kind of it comes about that it takes so long and, you know, it's so time consuming. And then it's kind of, you know, then they'll see the value in it potentially.
They see the value. Yeah,
so
indeed.
Yeah.
Stevie, probably a bit early to be asking you, but do you have an exit strategy? Are you thinking about where this goes? Is this sort of a business to give you a lifestyle, or are you building up to have multiple people? You know, does it have a sort of an end point?
Yeah. So the goal for me is, I'm not one of those people that kind of is building a business with the intention of selling it. I think I'll probably work forever, and I actually really passionately love doing what I'm doing. So for me, what I can see is I would love to get to the point where, you know, this training and strategy is something that I'm really building to the point where, you know, I've got an online offering and that sort of thing, and then potentially building the management side of it up so that I've got a small agency as well. But I don't really want to exit it. Like, I'm really passionate about it and I kind of want to do it forever.
Yeah, you sound like I feel kindred, because I feel like that as well. It's like I just love what I do, and just I can't imagine not doing it, you know, anytime in the future.
I feel so lucky and grateful to be able to
I know it is. It's such a lovely feeling, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's interesting you say how you were in the corporate world. Well, in your sort of, because I was the same. I loved I loved what I did. I mean, you always had good days and bad days. But I pretty much, you know, I was a great employee to have because I loved being there and I loved helping and I loved being on projects and anyway.
I think it's about loving what you do as well, because I did come from law where I was never, ever, ever passionate about it. And I did the work, but it was always like I never enjoyed going to work and I never enjoyed doing it. And then literally to go from that into something that I loved so much, I was so grateful to be able to do it and kind of just wanted to be there all the time. So I think...
And get paid for it.
Whether you love it, you know what I mean? Yeah, totally.
That's right. Okay, so let's look at some reflective questions. What do you wish you'd done differently at the beginning? So it's sort of around August, September, you were traveling, you came back, you started to take on clients. I think you've said there's one there that you maybe didn't charge enough money for what you did. But is there anything that you'd like to have done differently from the beginning?
Yes, because it's probably coming back to bite me at the moment, and it's having the time to get really set up with systems and processes so that when it gets really consistently busy, what I'm finding, and I'm making time for it at the moment, which is great. So I've kind of blocked out February to get myself sorted with that. But really having a systems and processes to make life easier for myself, because what I'm finding at the moment is that I'm doing things really manually, things that could be automated. I am writing out the same email, you know, 5 times a day because I don't have the time to make it a template, and literally just like sitting down, getting all of that stuff sorted so that when it does get busy, it's kind of just rolling out and it's not stressing me.
I think that's, So, and the thing is, you're really only a few months in. So, you know, taking stock now is fantastic. But you're right. If you don't do this, then in a year's time, you're still doing the same email 5 times and probably 25 times by then, because
I know. Yeah.
And that's not the best use of your time. So
not ideal. No.
Not ideal. So, and this is a slightly different question. Is there something you wish you'd known from the start that, you know, you've come to realise in the last few months that if you'd known that back then, that would have been helpful?
Probably the biggest thing is not thinking that I could do it when I first started out, even as a blog. So I never really had the confidence, or you know what, it wasn't even the confidence. It was that I never thought or gave myself the time to just start, to really kind of go all in on it, think that I could make it a business, really kind of, that's hands down the biggest thing, because I think so many people, not just myself, but even friends that I have still working in corporate at the moment, they kind of look at me and they're like, so amazing, you know, you've started a business, that's so great. And it's like, but you can do it as well, you know. And it's probably just that kind of realization a little bit earlier on.
That it was something that you could potentially do.
Definitely.
And
Yeah.
yeah.
And just to back yourself, and it's not kind of like a pie in the sky thing. It's something that you can really actually do if you just work bloody hard.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a lot of that, you know, you the work bloody hard, you know, and that's part of it, is that you do, you know, and I think there's a lot of people think that it's actually going, you know, that you're going to be sitting at home or sitting at the beach, and you know, it's not like that. It's so not that.
You actually, you have to be okay with working about 3 times as hard as you ever have before.
That's right. Yeah, to give yourself the freedom.
Totally.
Stevie, who apart from you, I mean, obviously you back yourself, and you can either name names here or you can talk in generality. Who has been of greatest assistance to you and to your business?
Do you know, probably the hardest thing I have at the moment is that I don't really have anyone around me that is in a similar boat or that has done something similar that I can bounce off. And to be honest, it's something that I'm finding really hard because, you know, obviously my partner's so supportive, but he doesn't understand the ins and outs of what I'm doing. A lot of my friends aren't doing a similar thing. So I think I've whinged to my partner Jules recently about how I don't really have anyone to bounce off.
Yes.
So
it can be quite lonely, can't it?
Yeah, it's actually really hard, and it's really hard not to have anyone that, you know, can give you tips around things like pricing and, you know, how to set yourself up with systems and processes and that sort of thing. I did a full day coaching session actually with a lady that I think is just amazing. I interviewed her on my podcast just recently as well, and she was great in terms of mapping out the year for me and working together to do that. But yeah, I think that's probably one thing that I just wish I had more people around me that were doing a similar thing.
And I think that's sometimes where the co-working spaces or, you know, joining a community, that's why those communities do so well, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's something that I would love to do actually, kind of in the near future. Because the other thing is working from home can be quite crazy when you're used to being around people all the time. So
yeah, I sometimes say to people because I run a program for getting started in a business, and I sometimes say to people, you know, that person that you walk into the lunchroom and they're in there making a cup of tea and you turn around and walk out, there's a point where you actually will be quite happy to just even talk to them. Because you just want someone to talk
to.
So Stevie, that said about, you know, missing that sort of corporate or that workplace environment, who gives you feedback? Where do you get feedback about your business and about yourself?
I think that's probably another thing where at the moment I kind of would really love someone to give me honest feedback on different aspects of what I'm doing. So I'm so lucky and grateful to have amazing friends and things around me that are huge supporters. But I would just love someone to come in and say, you know what, you should probably do that differently, or just really honest feedback on things like, every aspect of what I'm doing really. But yeah, I think that again is probably one thing that I'm missing at the moment, and kind of wish I had, because you don't know, I guess, until you get that constructive feedback where you can improve. And I kind of feel like at the moment I'm just flying, you know, a little bit blind, and I would love someone to come and tap me on the shoulder and say, you know, maybe work on this or work on that, you know.
So finding that community is very important, isn't it?
Totally. Yeah, definitely.
So, Stevie, you've alluded to a few of your characteristics, but what are the 3 key characteristics that you have, that you believe you have, that have made you successful?
I'd say probably the biggest thing for me, and I wouldn't know if it's a characteristic or not, but I'm really mindful these days of the fact that, without being too airy-fairy about it, our life is really short, and that it's really important to do the things that you want to do now. So I think, I don't know if it's a characteristic, but it's definitely something that at the moment I'm really driven by. And, you know, just kind of going for whatever it is that you want to do, whether it's business or, you know, whether it's going and traveling or whatever it is. I think that's something that's driving me at the moment. Other characteristics, I don't know, you'd have to ask my mates.
Well, I think your enthusiasm and passion really stands out. You know, that has to be.
To be honest, that's what's driving me at the moment, because, you know, I am working so hard and I don't feel like it's a chore. It's something that I wake up every day and feel really grateful to be doing and love it. So yeah, I think that's definitely something that's driving me at the moment. And probably the fact that I work hard, like I don't mind hard work.
Yes.
It's never been something that's been an issue for me. So that can be a great thing, and it can also sometimes be to my detriment. So
but as you said, it's because you love what you do so much that it doesn't
Yep.
actually even feel like work as such.
Definitely. Yeah.
So you've got your friends, your mates who are still working in their jobs, and you know they are saying to you, and you've kind of alluded to the answer to this question already, but somebody says to you, you know, I've got an idea for a business. What do you think? What do you say to them? What do you say to someone who thinks they'd like to start a business?
That they should go for it 100%. Just start and do it. I honestly think that so many people spend so much time in this cycle of kind of thinking about it, and then the week gets away from them, and then the next week gets away from them, and then the year's gone and nothing happens. I honestly think that you just need to go for it, take the smallest step towards whatever it is that you want to do. Like honestly, for me, I literally just wrote a blog post and put together a Squarespace website, and then I wrote a second blog post, and then I wrote a third, and it kind of went from there. And I honestly, genuinely, so passionately think that if you don't just take a little step in the right direction, then you'll never ever do it, and you'll always wonder. And it's the best feeling. Like I honestly love doing what I'm doing, and it would just be so cool for other people to have that feeling as well.
Yeah. And is that expression, you know, don't die wondering, as you say, you know, like life's fragile. It could be over in a blink. And and it's not that you want to live your life thinking, well, I could be dead in a minute, but it's that idea that it is fragile, and, you know, we've got to do what we have to do while we're here.
Yeah, I don't know. And it just sounds so airy-fairy, but, you know, we're so lucky to be here, and we may as well make the most of it, you know.
Well, and so lucky to live in Australia where we have such abundance, really. Like we're incredibly lucky, aren't we?
Yeah.
Stevie, thank you so much for your time. Now, I just have one last question, and it's a general. Is there anything else that you'd like to add? Stevie Says Social is your website. It's your podcast. Is there anything else that you'd like to say to the audience or anybody else who's listening? Because the people listening to this podcast are people who are thinking about starting a business. They're like your mates there who've still got jobs, or they're people who are getting started in those early days. So is there any last words of wisdom you have for them?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back, I guess, to what I kind of tell my clients in terms of we are so, so lucky to live in a time where you can really easily build up your own thing yourself using things like social media marketing, using things like content marketing. Even 10 years ago, that wouldn't have been possible. And we may as well, you know, make the most of it, because there's so much opportunity for us to really, whatever it is, do what we're passionate about.
Just do it.
Just do it.
Get that nest egg and a pillow and get on with it. But I think you're a terrific example of someone who had the side hustle. You know, there's a lot of people, you know, experimenting with it as a side hustle first, or seeing, you know, what they can do, and then making the leap at some point.
And you
don't have to quit
at
that.
a certain point. Like, I could have kept going for easily another year to 2 years and wondered whether it would be okay. Like, you need to make an educated leap, because at some stage, you know, you just need to jump off, see what happens, and kind of go from there. And honestly, the worst thing that could ever happen is that you go back to the job that you had before. I mean, it's not so bad.
No. And at least you've tried.
Yeah, exactly.
At least you've tried. Okay, Stevie, thank you so much for your time today. I'll put the links through to your podcast and website in the show notes. And if anybody wants to make contact with you, they can. And thank you.
Thanks, Ingrid.
Thanks for listening, and wasn't that just great? Did we laugh a little bit too much? No, can't have too much happiness. In amongst all that laughter, there were some real gold nuggets from Stevie, including one of the things Stevie mentions right there near the end, and might resonate with some of you. When I asked Stevie about the characteristics that make her successful in her business, she talks about her work ethic and how hard she works to achieve what she wants. And then she said, our life is really short, and it's really important to do the things you want to do now. How very true. My huge thanks to Stevie for this interview conversation. As always, you can find full transcripts of all our podcasts over at my website, healthynumbers.com.au, with all the links and the show notes. If you have any questions about how to create and start your own business, just drop me an email, ingrid@healthynumbers.com.au. Everybody knows I answer every email personally. Let me know what you're working on and where you need some assistance. As always, we say, ideas without action, well, that's what they are, ideas. What action are you inspired to take today? Till next time, thanks for listening.